What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? And in light of what we saw last week, the New Testament worship services, worship gatherings were more interactive. We're going to be wild and crazy, and I'm going to ask for your answers. What are you afraid of? Clowns. Well, I thought, like someone's got to say clowns, right? It's sort of been a thing, and it's out this weekend. Yeah. Storms, okay, can understand that one. Tornadoes, that would do it. Spiders, yeah, I was waiting for that. Spiders and snakes, something like that. Bugs. Sharks. More. Crocodiles, yeah, well, stay away from the zoo then, right? Oh, you're going to the zoo. I thought about this, and it's interesting. I'm not really afraid of the dark, and I'm not necessarily afraid of the ocean. But I remember Lisa and I took a cruise once, and we went to, out and looked at night, and I thought if I fell over at night, I wouldn't drown, I wouldn't be eaten by sharks, it would be instant heart attack. Just to see that vastness, and then you add the dark to that, no, I wouldn't even last long enough for them to throw a rope down. I would be gone, yeah. Heights, a lot of people have that one. Yeah, I hear that's like one of the ones you're born with, is heights and something else. Well, how about this? As Christians, should we be afraid of anything? If we trust God, should we be afraid of anything? And I'm asking myself, I trust God, but I trusted Him when I was on that ship, and I still think I would have died before I hit the water. I don't know. Faith, the Bible tells us, Paul tells us, faith is the opposite of sight. Well, we're going to see in this passage today in Mark that faith is also the opposite of fear. Faith is the opposite of fear, and the context for this is what we've seen. We're still in Mark 4, and so it's these parables. The parable of the sower that focused on individual responses to the word, and then the parables that showed us the nature, the way God intends the kingdom to grow. Well, both of those, on the individual level and on the church level, as we face major situations that these bring about, it gives us the opportunity for faith. And it also gives us the opportunity for fear. And what we're going to see today is, to the degree we have fear, we do not have faith. Now, can we get rid of all fear? Boy, I don't know if I'll ever get to that point where I could fall in the water and be okay. But we can get rid of the fear of the situations that come along that are of a more, say, spiritual nature, or at least to have certainly a spiritual solution to them. Difficulties that we face one way or the other, we can trust God for a lot more things than we do, and we can dispel some of that fear. And it goes back again to this choice that we have based on these other choices we've seen. So we're in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 is where we're going to start. And it says, on that day, so it's connected to what we saw, the day that Jesus gave these parables. When evening had come, He said to them, to His disciples, let us go across to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And leaving the crowd, they took Him with them in the boat, just as He was. I wasn't sure what that was, just as He was. Well, it seems that, He didn't go to shore, didn't get anything, just left. He had been teaching out in the boat, not far from the shore, to give Him some space, and they just took off across the other side. And other boats were with Him. And then verse 37, a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But He was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke Him and said to Him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And He awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey Him? Well, you look at this, and Jesus asks another one of those questions that on the surface it seems, well, it's pretty obvious, Jesus. He asks them, Why are you so afraid? Well, look at verse 37. A great windstorm arose. Now, the Sea of Galilee, maybe you've heard, it is known for just these instantaneous storms that before you can even get across. And I've been there, and it certainly wasn't a major storm, but I remember when we got in the boat on one side, it was absolutely calm, and by the time we got to the other side, it was a little rocky. There were more waves than there had been when we started. Well, it says this is a great windstorm. The waves were breaking into the boat. These were experienced fishermen, and so they had seen storms Well, they also knew when the waves break into the boat, and the boat was already filling. The boat was filling up with water. Well, I don't know much about this stuff, but it's bad for a boat to fill with water. That much I know. And so Jesus asked, why are you so afraid? Oh, because Jesus, there's a storm and the boat's filling with water. We've seen what happens when boats fill with water in the middle of a storm, and it's not a good thing. Well, as we face things in life, as we make these choices to live for God individually, to begin our life as a Christian, or as we see things that the Bible calls us to do in our growth and maturity as a Christian, we're going to face some dangers. Now, it might not be a physical danger, but it will be situations that, you'd have to be blind not to see. You'd have to be naive not to have some element of fear. I remember once I went to Bible college in Florida, and I had a friend from Tennessee. He used to go out and look for rattlesnakes on the campus. And he even had a snake pole with the loop on it and everything, and he had never seen one. Well, one day he goes out, or he asked me and my roommate if we wanted to go with him. And I thought, sure. So he's got his snake pole, and I've got a stick, and my other friend, who was also from Indiana, he was just out there walking around. As a matter of fact, he's just trouncing through the tall grass, and we're like, wow, he's like the bravest guy we've ever seen. Well, it turns out he just didn't expect he would see one, because we did find one that day, and he's the one that freaked out. My friend and I are like, how are we going to catch it? And he's like, how are we going to get out of here? And so it wasn't like bravery, it was just he didn't realize, okay, there is some danger here. There is some element of risk. There's something that could happen that I don't want to happen. We almost caught the rattlesnake too, but that's a different story. We got real close. As we face life, as we do these things, we're going to have, I always think of finances, you're going to have situations where I don't know how I'm going to pay the bill. This new thing, this unexpected thing came up. I don't know how I'm going to fix the car, and then the jobs in general. How's this going? My company, what's going to happen with that? What's going to happen with my job, which takes us back to the finances. We have health issues that come up for us and others. Relationships where how is this ever going to be resolved? How is it going to work out? All of those things come around in life. Pressures from others. All of those things are very real. And it makes total sense to look at those and have at least some first impression. As we saw in the Psalm this morning in Sunday school, this first impression of, oh, God, this is bad. I don't want this. Please help with this. There's some element, some possibility of fear. You can see that. Let's realize, as a matter of fact, if we're not facing some situations like that, maybe we're not doing something right. If there's nothing that makes us uncomfortable, we're probably not living the Christian life. There's an old saying that, preachers, whatever, maybe Christians and leaders in general are supposed to afflict the comforted and comfort the afflicted. If someone's going through a difficult time, all right, we want to help them. But sometimes as Christians, we need to be less comfortable. We need to step out. We need to experience some of these things. That's the way the Christian life's meant to be lived. That we have to rely on God. We have to have faith in Him. And as we see, as we face those, we're either going to have faith or fear. Jesus says, have you still no faith? After He says, why are you so afraid? He says, have you still no faith? And so it makes it clear. He's saying if you had the faith, you wouldn't be afraid. The two are the opposite of each other. One can dispel the other. And so you think about this. The Bible tells us faith is the opposite of sight. Well, here we see faith is the opposite of fear, and they really go together, because fear is what? I'm afraid of what I see. I'm afraid of what I see might happen, or is happening, could happen, how bad it could get. I'm afraid of that. And so it's the same thing. Fear and sight go together. I'm afraid of what I see there. And we're always going to have one or the other, to some degree. Even when we take it for granted, when I walk across the floor, I don't stop to think about the fact I've got faith that this floor is going to hold me. I've got faith that I'm probably not going to fall down, and if I do, because some of us are prone to that, I'll probably make it through and be okay. But you know what? If you're walking across a tightrope, that changes things, doesn't it? Even if you are, if you're definitely just beginning, if the risk is there, well, now I've got some faith in my ability, but I'm far more aware of it than I am when I'm walking across the floor. And there's an element of fear. And if I'm not that good, or if something happens, all of that, if there's stakes, if there's not a net, you can see how, to one degree or the other, we're either facing faith or fear all the time. We just don't maybe stop and think about it. It's usually the fear that comes to mind. When things are just okay, when I assume they're going to be all right, I don't think about that. But I face a major situation, and wow, I can see what there is to be afraid of. The sight. I see what there is. And so now, which one is it? Am I going to face it with the faith or face it with the fear? And the thing this tells us is we never have to be afraid. You know, we might say, and I'm still struggling with the whole ocean at night, but I never have to be afraid. There's never a situation God puts me in where I say, it's just not possible to not be afraid. That might be my first, the thing that hits me first, that, our stomach tightens up. I can't stop that. But I can take a step back and I can look at this and realize I don't have to be afraid. Whatever it is that God leads me to in my Christian life, whatever it is, either becoming a Christian and the persecutions that come that we see in that parable of the sower, whatever it is as a believer where I see something that says, okay, I need to stand up and take a step for God in this way, in my family or at work or whatever, I need to make this commitment, I need to begin tithing to God, I need to do more to witness to others and build those relationships, and it gives me this knot in the pit of my stomach. I don't have to be afraid. That reaction is normal. That initial response, I don't have to be afraid. I'm either going to have faith or fear, but I can have the faith. Well, the question should come to mind, faith for what? It even comes to mind here when Jesus says to them, have you still no faith? And it's interesting. We talked about this in Sunday school. Faith is built on reason. You see things. And so Jesus says, I can understand why you didn't have faith at first, but have you still no faith? All this time you spent with me, all those things you've seen, have you still no faith? Well, what is faith? Before we say, okay, faith for what? What should they have had faith for? What should they have expected? Faith is belief that does something. I've said this before. It's why I still love that Indiana Jones clip where he comes to believe there's something there. Based on what he's seen, the other two clues, if you remember that movie, the other two clues proved to be right. He's got this book. It says take a step of faith. So he comes to believe there must be something here. So it's one thing to believe, it's another to take that step. Well, that's what faith is. It's belief that does something. Well, in this case, and Jesus says, have you still no faith? What should they have had belief in and then acted on? And a lot of people say, well, they should have believed that Jesus was the Son of God. I don't think so. Not at this point. Not yet. We have to realize that. When we look back on this and you become a Christian, it's the first thing you realize. Jesus is the Son of God. It's fact number one. Well, it wasn't fact number one for them. Jesus didn't want it to be. I can't tell them I'm the Son of God right away. It would literally blow their minds. Especially these Jews, just anyone, but definitely the Jews. The one thing the Jews were known for is their monotheism. They were the only group that believed there is one God. Just one. And so it took a lot to convince them, and they weren't there yet, and that's okay. That's not something you would want them to be convinced of easily. Someone comes along and say, hey, I'm the Son of God, and the first thing sure, we buy into it. And so what was it that they should have believed in at this point? What had they seen? What was the basis for belief and faith? What had they seen at this point? Well, they'd seen John the Baptist. Someone who's clearly a prophet of God, and they had seen him say, there's one coming who is greater than me. If they hadn't seen it personally, they'd heard of Jesus then coming and being baptized by John and this voice from heaven. And to say even my beloved son, at that point, his son could be just a close relationship. They wouldn't understand the Trinity as we do. To see Jesus do these miracles, to show he is clearly from God, and then to hear his message, preaching the kingdom of heaven has come, it's at hand, it's getting close. That's what they'd seen so far. Well, what had happened up to this point? And I always point out that the Jews, even the disciples, had the wrong expectation of the kingdom. They expected a physical kingdom. Well, in this case, that works even more to their advantage of what they should have believed in. If their thought is Jesus is here to set up a physical kingdom, what had he done so far? Virtually nothing. The key to setting up a physical kingdom, remember they were occupied by Rome, is going to be kicking out Rome. Well, he hadn't even done anything to begin that. So here they have this indication God has sent someone to set up the kingdom, and it hasn't even come close. And matter of fact, this someone, Jesus, has called us as his inner circle. So we're a part of it. Well, now stop and think. Here they are on this boat in the middle of a storm, and it is filling up with water. But when Jesus says, "Have you still no faith?" what's he saying? You've seen God is clearly doing something here. You've seen that I am from God. You don't understand yet just exactly who I am, but you know I'm from him. You know I've come to set up the kingdom. You know I've called you to be a part of it, and we aren't even close. You think God's going to let us die right here in the middle of the sea? What kind of God would he be if he's got that plan and the storm derails it? That's what Jesus was saying. Have you still no faith? Don't you believe what God is doing and have the faith then to trust him? It's like things look bad, but God's got something he's doing. I remember another movie, Big Fish. The person when he's young sees how he's going to die. And so the rest of his life, he can face these dangerous situations with absolutely no fear. Why? That's not how I'm going to die. So he'd go on these, he was signed up in the war. He'd go on these dangerous missions and parachute, all this stuff. He didn't care. That's not how I'm going to die. What if you knew that for sure? Well, that should be them. We've got something God has called us to do. We can't drown here. We're not done. It hasn't happened. Well, stop and think about that for us. We should have faith that God is going to see us through what he wants us to do. Now, here's the difference for us, is we don't know as clearly as they do what God wants to do. And I talk about this all the time. We can only have faith that God is going to do what he's told us he's going to do. But nowadays we hear a lot of this. Christians saying, I've got faith that God's going to do this or God's going to do this. And it's real interesting. I don't always ask, how do you know? Did he tell you he's going to do that? Because otherwise, if I say I have faith that God's going to do something that he didn't tell me, that I came up with, it sort of makes God just a genie, doesn't it? A little better than a genie, because at least we're not limited to 3 wishes. We'll just keep doing it. But that makes God a divine genie. No, I'm certainly not the one who gets to pick and choose what God does. So I can only have faith that God will do what he's shown me he will do. Now, I truly believe God does lead us. He does make it clear. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what I've called you to do. God has ways of revealing that. But even when he shows us the general idea, I think we all know from experience he doesn't give us the details, does he? He doesn't always tell us how or what. You know the story of Abraham and Isaac. When Abraham went up the mountain and he said, we'll be back. He had faith that God was going to see them through. Well, some things in the New Testament seem to indicate he thought he was going to kill Isaac and God was going to bring him back from the dead. He didn't know the details. He didn't have faith that God's going to stop him and provide a ram that's stuck in the bushes. He knew God had led him to do something. In that case, God said. He didn't know the details. He didn't know the how, didn't know the what. And the one that we really don't know is the when. Even when God calls us to do something, and it seems like that, how often have you thought, okay, God, it seems like nothing has said I'm still not on the right path, but what's taking you so long? This made me think of my online Bible study ministry, Looking Intently. I went back and looked. I knew it had been a long time. Things came together between things I'd done with screenwriting and even some things with network marketing that led me to, okay, here's how I can put this and market it and da-da-da. I went back and looked. It was January 16th of 2016 that I first posted on Facebook and set up a page that says, hey, I want to do this online Bible study. Well, it was August 4th of this last year when I finally launched it. A year and a half later. Now, even when I moved here to Indiana a year ago, one of the first things I did was went down and set up a bank account. All right, if you look on the webpage, the very first one that introduces it, I'm in this setting. It's my sister-in-law's basement. That's where we were staying for 6 weeks until our house was available. And I thought, this is going to start up any time. I got to do this intro video. It was a year after that. So we don't know the details. We have to be very careful with I have faith that God's going to do this exactly this way or when. I believe He can lead us in general directions, but we have to be very careful with faith that. What we can always have, though, is faith in. And when you look through the Bible, you don't see, do a search. Go to Bible Gateway, do a search. You won't see faith that. You will see faith in God. In other words, I don't have faith that He's going to do anything specific because He hasn't told me a lot of the times. I just have faith in God, in who He is. He is God who what? He's in control and He loves me. Those are the two things I know when I don't know anything else, and I have faith in Him. I have faith that nothing is ever going to overwhelm Him or surprise Him or be too much for Him. He's in absolute control. And I have faith that He loves me because it's all been about that. He created me to have a relationship. When Adam and Eve and I followed in their footsteps, when I blew that relationship, He said, I'm going to restore it, and He sent His Son to do it. Everything about God shows He's in control, and He uses that control out of His love for me. Nothing happens that He doesn't allow or can't overcome or not. And that's part of that in. I have faith in God. I know you can overcome this. I also know you might not. You might not. Definitely not how I want or when I want. Maybe not at all. God, you might let this thing take me home to you. I don't know. But I have faith in you. That I can always have. And so, again, think about what we've seen the past few weeks. Think about this context, this parable of the sower. It's talking about as individuals, we are going to hear God's word. And if we are open to it and committed to it, we are going to face difficulties. We are going to face the persecution. We're going to face the thorns. It's up to us whether to make sure I'm focused or not distracted. But it's going to be difficult. I've got to be ready for it. There will be challenges just of life, and there will be extra challenges as a Christian. Satan is going to attack me. You know what? One thing we do know, we don't always know how God's going to lead us, but when He does and you're following it, I guarantee you, Satan will be there to put the pressure on. The most difficult times of my life have been when I started the church, when I was getting ready for the Looking Intently ministry, and the week before last, as I got ready for that sermon that talked about we need to re-examine the dynamic we have for church. Does it fit what God's saying? Those are the 3 toughest times I can remember. And I truly feel like they were times where I was really doing what God wanted me to do, and they had big potential implications, and Satan was saying, I don't want you to do that. You just maintain the status quo. Satan says, that's fine, go ahead. Look what that's accomplishing. But you really try to follow God, personally and as a church, there are going to be things that are scary. There are going to be things that challenge us. And God's going to allow them because that's the very nature of it. The great things that happen when I have faith. Well, then God says, all right, I'm going to let Satan test you, attack you. I'm going to let these things happen to see that faith, because that's what it takes. The essence of what we saw, the greatness about the kingdom growing in those parables, that He planted the seed, it grows, He knows not how. I don't know the details, I just know it's you, God. Well, if I don't get to that point, I won't see these great things happen. So God allows these challenges and tests so we can get to that point. It all plays together. They're not separate. Let me see if you can weather the storm to get to this point. Weathering the storm is how you get to this point. It develops that faith, which is the essence of our Christian life. We walk by faith, not by sight. If we don't get that, we're missing it. So God allows us to be tested so we get that. Things can be scary, but don't you want that? Don't you want to get to that point? Have you heard stories of Christians who just seem to have this wild life of faith? As I was getting ready for the sermon, I remembered hearing of one, and I had to Google to find out because I couldn't remember his name. It was George Mueller. Felt God called him to start an orphanage. And the entire time, he never sought out money. He prayed and trusted God. And God provided his life, the life of that orphanage. It tells one specific story where there's 300 kids in the orphanage and they have no food that morning. And he tells the person, he says, get the children dressed, get them in the dining hall, have them sit down, God will provide. And shortly after they're sitting there, there's a knock at the door. A local baker said, God put it on my heart to bake 3 extra, servings of bread, 300 servings of bread. And shortly after that, there's another knock at the door. It's the milkman. My milk cart just broke down. By the time I get the wheel fixed, the milk will spoil. Can you use it? And God provided food, provided that meal for those kids. Doesn't that give you chills? All right, do you just want to read about those people? Wouldn't you like to be one of those people? Wouldn't you like that to be your story? God led me to do this, and I did it and didn't know how it was going to work out, but I just trusted Him because He led me, and He's not going to let me drown if I haven't accomplished what He wants me to do. He's going to provide. And then you start getting your own stories. Here's how He did it. Here's what He did. And when those stories happened, if it was just George starting an orphanage, well, George is a great guy. Okay, wow, George. But when you hear this story that he started an orphanage and relied on God, when you heard that story about the bread and the milk, did you think, wow, great George? No, you're like, what an awesome God. That's the way our life is supposed to be. If all we're doing just makes people look at us and say, what a nice guy or woman, we're missing the point. Our purpose from moment one is to bring glory to God. So if I'm not living in a way that will bring glory to Him, that's where Satan says, go ahead. I'll let people call you nice all day long. Keep the attention on you away from God. You try to do something that's going to bring glory to Him, that's where I'm going to get you. But isn't that what we want? Don't you want to live that way? And that's what this is saying. It not only is possible, it should be that way. Well, one other thing struck me. I always look for a wait a minute moment, and this was sort of it. In verse 40, Jesus said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And in 41, they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey Him? Well, he asked them, why are you so afraid? At that point, clearly they weren't. But why had you been so afraid? The storm's over now, although they're probably still a little bit, you can sense that. But then after he says, why are you so afraid? It says they were filled with fear. I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. They're filled with fear because of what you did so that they're no longer afraid. Is that what you wanted? And it struck me, okay, sometimes when you see those wait a minute moments, you got to dig a little deeper. And that requires doing some work. It's a little easier in the more literal translations because you see that there's 2 words there, afraid and fear. And so maybe are they a little different? Although not even all the literal translations had that. You dig a little deeper, and there's some tools you can use online that are easy. I know where you can get a video that explains them. And you look at this, and all you had to do is, the word for afraid is cowardly. It's the loss of courage. Yeah, I'm scared and can't follow through on something. I don't know what's going to happen. It's always negative in the New Testament. The word for fear, though, is the Greek word used to translate fear of the Lord. That fear that we're supposed to have of Him. So you take the two. Afraid would be like, I'm trapped in a cage with a lion. I'm afraid. Fear is that illustration I always use. There's a lion on a chain, and he can only get that far, and I'm this far. There's still something that says that's a lion, but at least I know something's holding him back. And in God's case, it's His nature. God isn't good, safe, but He's good. Well, that's the difference here. So Jesus calming the sea removed their afraidness of drowning, but it brought on fear. Because look what it says. Who is this then that even the wind and the sea obey Him? And notice when Jesus calmed, it says He rebuked the sea. He didn't pray to God. There's no reason to think that another prophet prior to Jesus could not have calmed a sea if he had prayed to God. Jesus didn't pray to God. He just said, stop. Peace, be still. And the storm listened to Him. And so these disciples are starting to realize, who is this? This isn't just a prophet. This isn't just someone who God is working through powerfully. And they got this fear. Who's here in our midst? Yeah. How much of a lion is he? Who are we around? And that's not a bad thing. We're going to see it can be next week because of the implications. Here I am with someone beyond me, but not inherently. And so God does not want us to be afraid of circumstances and dangers. But once again, and I say this in our Christian culture, He doesn't want us to be afraid because we don't think they will happen. Oh, I'm a Christian. God's not going to let anything difficult happen to me. You know, that's not true, is it, Bonnie? Bonnie's here from Florida, literally drove up from Florida. We've got people all around, Texas, Florida, people in the fires, life in general. God allows difficult things to happen. God doesn't want us to be afraid, not because He's going to protect us from everything before it happens. He's going to be with us in the midst of it while it happens. That's what God is telling us here because of our faith in God. I don't know what He's going to do, but I know I can trust Him. Well, that same nature of God that produces faith should produce fear. Should produce that, oh, this is God. But again, my relationship with Him is built on His love for me. God is this awesome, divine lion, but He loves me. He loves me. And we've got to balance that. And so that's what this parable is about as we see this. It's like, take those steps of faith and trust God when the danger comes. It will come. That's what faith requires, or faith entails, is part of it. I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust God. Don't back away from those. Matter of fact, seek them out and trust Him. And so what's the root problem that keeps that from happening? I always think there's something underlying. I think we go to one of two extremes. Sometimes I think we label our afraidness as caution or common sense. I can't do that. That makes no sense. Yeah, well, Abraham walking up with his son Isaac made no sense, but it's where God led him. The other extreme, though, that I've seen, which can get in the way, and sometimes I think this is why we swing to the common sense side, is we see people who confuse faith with foolishness. You know, God will provide. I'm not going to do anything that makes any sense at all. I'm not going to be responsible. God will provide. No. We got to find that balance in the middle. I have to remember, I can't have faith that something's going to happen if God hasn't told me, but I can have faith in Him no matter what. And as He does lead me, I can follow Him. As He does reveal details, okay, but until I know the details, I'll just trust in Him. And I'll follow Him wherever He leads. You know, we do have God's leading in general. We do have a plan. Look on your handout, Matthew 28, 18 to 20. Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." We do have God's leading in that sense. God has told us as believers, go into the world and make disciples. Well, that means God has told us, I will provide whatever you need to do that. You face a situation that's difficult? Fine, I'm there with you. I'm there for you. I will help you. My power. When Jesus said, I am with you always, Jesus is with us always. The Son of God. And all that means, it's why we're told in Ephesians, this power that Jesus has, God gave Jesus to the church. And that's not to take away and make it seem like, okay, I can tell Him what to do, but as we fulfill this plan, as we fulfill God's commission, Jesus will be with us in all of His power. There is no obstacle that can derail us. The only thing that can derail us is our lack of faith and not following through on it. So what do I need to do now? How do we take this? Leave here different than we were when we came in. I have a couple things. First of all, ask yourself, do I sense any leading from God? Do I sense that God is leading me? And how does He do that? Well, I think it goes through that growth triangle that I always talk about. It fulfills this too. At the base is the Word of God. I see something there. Something keeps coming up. Situations, the second leg, There it is. There's the opportunity. It seems like God's saying this. There's an opportunity to live it out. And then I talk with other Christians. Here's what I'm thinking. Am I crazy, or what are you thinking? Well, you are crazy, but that's another question. Yes. You start to get some clarity from that. You sense God's leading. Well, if I am sensing God's leading, am I having any reluctance? Is there a part of you that says, yeah, it seems God's leading there, but I don't want to go there? And Jonah was pretty clear about God's leading. He had the advantage. God said, go. He said, no, don't want to. Are there times where we sense God's leading and we think, I don't really want to go there? Maybe God's not saying it. We can't do what Jonah did. He didn't have that excuse. We can. And then the last thing, ask God to make clear to you such a faith adventure. If you don't see it, say, God, I want one. I want to have a George Mueller story. God, before I die, give me one. And once you get one, you'll want another one and another one. God, I want to have some stories like that, where there is no other explanation than you. People can't help but see you and your glory, because nothing else can explain what you do in me and through me. I want that, God. Show it to me, please. Get me ready for it if I'm not. You're willing to do that one? You're willing to ask God that? God, show me a faith adventure. Something that totally takes me out of my comfort zone. Totally points to you and not me. Well, guess what? We got a time of decision right now. You can make the decision. I'm going to decide to ask God to do something that just freaks me out. I'm going to start praying, God, lead me on a faith adventure. You can decide to do that, or you can decide, no, I'm fine where I am. Same thing if you're not a Christian. If you haven't made that decision, that's a faith adventure. That's where it starts. And you can decide right now, I'm going to make that choice. Or you decide, no, that's not what I want to do. But we're giving you the opportunity. As we sing the song, come forward. If you want to talk to me or someone else after, be sure and do that. Don't miss out on this chance.